Pokémon has been a massive part of gaming for decades. Go ask your grandma if she knows what this is. She probably doesn't, but at least she tried. It all started in 1996 with the release of Red and Green. Ever since, it's been the most popular franchise of all time. Then they released Red and Blue across the world. And after a few years, the Pokémon company had an idea.
Let's do it again!
Pokémon FireRed and LeafGreen released on September 7th, 2004 in North America, January 28th, 2004 in Japan, October 1st, 2004 in Europe, and September 23rd, 2004 in Australia. These games took the iconic Gen 1 games and reimagined them with new visuals and just overall upgrades. These weren't remakes, they were remasters that brought the classic Pokémon experience onto the Game Boy Advance. FireRed and LeafGreen released at a time where Pokémon was having a huge resurgence in popularity across the world. With Ruby and Sapphire doing extremely well and the anime and card game doing numbers of their own, it was a perfect time for Pokémon to start over. Red and Blue are some of the most iconic video games of all time, and fans all over the world were eager to revisit the Kanto region with updated graphics and gameplay. Now that I have this, why would I want this?
Hey, this is an acquired taste.
The release of these titles marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Pokémon series. Remaking older Pokémon titles is half of the releases that we've gotten, and it just makes sense. To take the older titles and give them some quality of life changes and upgrades is great for both new players and old players. The new players can experience the older titles without having to hunt down a retro copy, and the returning players can experience all of the changes that the series has gotten over the years. Now, there is such thing as too much change. When you take the original idea and change it too much, you end up with whatever this is. Red and Green came out about 8 years prior to the release of these games. And just 8 years later, these games got a complete facelift. These are faithful remakes, and the story remains largely the same, with a few additions to make it feel fresh for even returning players. The term faithful remakes is a bold term nowadays, especially with the release of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, but back in 2004, this is how it was done. You couldn't remake a game and have it be an entirely different game. Take the E.T. remake for the PS1. It should have been the exact same as it was on the Atari. Just like in the originals, you begin your adventure in Pallet Town, a small town that has 2 houses and a lab.
Where do you sleep, old man?
Your mother's bed. After trying to escape on your own, Professor Oak lures you back to his lab to make you pick your starter Pokemon, Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle. Once you pick your starter, Professor Oak's grandson, Blue, picks whatever starter would counter yours. You end up battling him and inevitably beat him up in front of his grandpa. From there, you journey across the Kanto region. Like the original, you take on 8 gyms and eventually the Elite Four. Along the way, you battle Team Rocket, who's a group of thugs who want to steal people's Pokemon. Team Rocket is a classic. They were the perfect team to be the first villain group. Stealing other people's Pokemon is a basic idea, but it works perfectly. Being led by Giovanni, who's essentially a Pokemon mob boss, was also perfect. They just want to steal and collect rare Pokemon. Their simplicity is their main selling point. They don't need to try and warp space-time or be cheerleaders for another trainer. Beyond collecting rare Pokemon, they also want to take over the Kanto region and create powerful new Pokemon. They even made Mewtwo one of the most iconic Pokemon of all time.
Science.
Along the way, you battle trainers, catch and trade for Pokemon, and make your way to the Elite Four. All of the gym leaders in this series are really solid. They set the standard for how good gym leaders should be. I can't say there's a bad gym leader in the entire game. Characters like Blaine, Lieutenant Surge, and even Giovanni are all just iconic. Between battling gym leaders, you also beat your rival a few times and potentially kill one of his Pokemon, but that's up for debate. Blue is the perfect rival. He's just a jerk. Nothing fancy, just an overall entitled kid who you get to one-up across your journey. He always is one step ahead of you, which I think is great because it gives you something to strive for the entire game. It all boils up to the point where you battle him as the new Pokemon champion. He was the champion for maybe 10 minutes before you got there. His unlikability and having him one step ahead of you the entire journey just makes him a perfect rival overall. But what makes FireRed and LeafGreen really stand out is how they enhance the game. Having updated graphics, improved gameplay mechanics, and a few other additions like the Sevii Islands really make this game pop. The Sevii Islands are a new set of islands that weren't present in the original games. In the post-game, they add a brand new storyline about the remnants of Team Rocket with additional quests and battles, and a load of new Pokemon to catch. This was a solid post-game. At minimum, Pokemon should have some amount of post-game content to keep you playing. It doesn't have to be a new story. Having a challenge area like the Battle Frontier is just as good. The Sevii Islands were a perfect area to explore after you beat the game, and it added a good amount of content to keep you busy after the main story's over. More recent games like Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet seem like they have an absence of post-game content in favor of DLCs. But back in the day, you had to have something to keep people playing in the game day one.
You see, back in my day...
Shut up, old man!
Look how old he
Yeah,
is.
you're
He's
old.
gross. He's gross.
As far as remakes go, FireRed and LeafGreen were designed to be more than just remakes. They were designed to bridge the gap between fans of the originals and new fans. The development team at Game Freak knew they had to make a game that appealed to two separate audiences, and that's a tough task for any developer. Making something that two groups of people can agree is good is a hard task, but they knocked it out of the park with these. The most noticeable change this game got was to the graphics. The Kanto region was brought to life in full color. Red and Blue came out for the Game Boy, and they were made to work on that console. But as the late 90s and early 2000s went on, the quality of video game graphics grew exponentially. This came out in 1998, and this came out in 2008.
What kind of dark magic is this?
The visual upgrade is night and day. Each town, route, and cave have so much detail. The new Pokemon sprites look so much better, with each Pokemon having way more personality. Having the Pokemon look this good just made everything in this game more engaging. The gameplay itself was also rebalanced and modernized. Being older games, Red and Blue were wildly unbalanced, with Pokemon like Alakazam being uncontrollably strong. In Red and Blue, the special stat was combined for both attack and defense, making some Pokemon just entirely busted. As of Ruby and Sapphire though, they had split special into special attack and special defense stats, as well as added abilities and natures into the game. These changes have become the modern standard, with Pokemon abilities being an extremely important part of competitive play. They also added the new types, Dark and Steel, which were added in Generation 2. This helped counter the wildly popular Psychic type from the originals, and made the game more balanced overall. The changes made the game feel so much more balanced and controlled. Red and Blue are older titles and have wild issues with the code allowing all sorts of exploits to happen. You can go into the first gym with a level 100 Pokemon easily. You can catch Mew before the third gym, and you can even catch whatever this is. There is something to say about how janky these games are that make it great, but I would much rather play FireRed and LeafGreen. This game also added the fan favorite double battles from Ruby and Sapphire, making it feel like a more complete package. The art style of the GBA games is so simple but so perfect. The Game Boy titles are just slightly too old for me. I prefer my content to be in full color, but I get how these titles could be the preferred way to play this generation to some. The most underrated addition to this game though is the running shoes. These are shoes that let you run.
Oh my god, alert the press!
Being able to run is something that is often overlooked in the Pokemon series. It's become part of the basic formula, but in the originals you couldn't run, meaning every single step you take was at a snail's pace. Another great addition to the game was the Verse Seeker. It's an item that allows you to re-battle trainers that you've already battled before. This added an entire new layer of depth to the game. You can explore anywhere you've already been and run it back with trainers who are on the route. This helped make training way less of a grind in the early game and added a lot of replayability to the post-game. Of course, this game also offered the National Pokédex. Due to being the first in the series, the original games only had the first 151 Pokemon. FireRed and LeafGreen expanded on this, allowing players to catch and train Pokemon from later generations after obtaining the National Dex. This was a huge draw for players who had grown attached to the Pokemon introduced in later games. After you beat the game, you can bring whatever Pokemon you want right into these titles. That means you can bring Mudkip over, so these games have to be good. These changes weren't just about making the game more accessible, they were about making it a better experience. A huge part of the Pokemon experience is trading and battling with friends, and these titles introduced the wireless adapter, which made trading and battling so much better.
Who needs wires these days? I don't know how this happened.
This device was quite literally a game changer. Now this is the standard way to connect with friends, but up until this point, you had to connect your consoles physically together with a link cable to interact. Now you can connect with anyone, anywhere in the world with the press of a button, but this was the first big step in that direction. Pokemon has always been about connecting with others, whether it's the characters in-game who you can trade with, or your friends in real life. Getting to see the legendary trainer Red's journey unfold in real time is something that all Pokemon fans love to see. A huge amount of people look at the Gen 1 games as the best Pokemon has ever been, and these took that and expanded on it in ways that made the experience better without taking away things that people missed. I'm sure that some people prefer the jumbled mess that is Red and Blue, and I understand that. These titles just feel like an overall more polished experience for any fan of the series. FireRed and LeafGreen were more than just remakes, they were the perfect introduction to the idea of Pokemon remakes. You could say that Pokemon Yellow was the original Pokemon remake, but they used the Game Boy's hardware and engine still. This was the first truly ground up remake of a game. They managed to capture the magic of the originals while introducing new features and improvements that made them stand out on their own. Updated graphics and gameplay changes, to the introduction of new features like the Sevii Islands, these games managed to capture the essence of what made Pokemon special, all while offering something fresh and exciting to both new and veteran players. If you can get your hands on this game for less than $1,000 and haven't played it yet, this is 100% worth it to this day. Sure, you could go play Let's Go, but why would you do that when you can have this? But as always, I wanted to say thank you for watching. I hope that you and your family have an incredible rest of your day, and if you liked anything that you saw here, please consider subscribing.